Hello and welcome to Telewizja Republika. We kind of knew it was coming. Actually, the whole world knew it, and then it just happened. On February 8th, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy announced the dismissal of Commander-in-Chief Valery Zaluzhny, appointing General Oleksandr Syrsky as his replacement. This decision followed months of speculation and a failed attempt to remove Zaluzhny on January 29th. Zelenskyy's choice of Syrsky signifies a significant leadership reshuffle within the Ukrainian armed forces, aiming for, and that's a quote, new management team to lead the country's military efforts. Following the major overhaul in the Ukrainian military's top brass, President Zelenskyy spent an entire day meeting with the new military leadership team. He emphasized the ongoing reboot of the armed forces management. Subsequently, Zelenskyy appointed General Yuri Sodol as the new commander of the joint forces, replacing General Serhiy. General Sodol, who has been leading Ukraine's Marines since 2018, is now tasked with a pivotal role in the armed forces amid the ongoing conflict. Kyiv Post quoted Zelenskyy's opinion on new faces in the top command of Ukrainian armed forces, and that's a quote. Colonel Vadim Sukharevsky's focus will be on uncrewed systems and development of drones. Colonel Andriy Lebedenko will focus on innovation, specifically the technology component of the army and combat systems. Clear practice with new technologies is needed, said Zelenskyy. Brigadier General Volodymyr Hrabatyuk will concentrate on operational work, staff work, planning, and new management. Another quote of Zelenskyy: in every staff they must fully understand the front, said President of Ukraine, repeating the leitmotif from the previous days when he announced that he insists his new commanders be familiar with the front rather than languishing at headquarters, end quote. Upon his appointment, General Oleksandr Syrsky outlined his strategic priorities for Ukraine's military, emphasizing the importance of detailed planning and efficient military logistics. Having previously commanded the Cartizia operational and strategic group and playing crucial roles in key battles like Bakhmut, Syrskyy's focus is on the rational distribution of resources and the needs of the frontline units, showcasing his approach towards enhancing Ukraine's military effectiveness in the conflict, as Kyiv Independent wrote. Kyiv Independent didn't write about the criticism of General, and this criticism is concentrated on the fact that, according to his critics, he is not afraid of giving up lives of his soldiers. But this is a war, and this is a war of attrition, and this is also the strategy of choice of Russia, and Ukraine has to face it. Last week, we talked to Joe Lindsay, former high official of News Corporation, owner of the Fox News, former employer of Tucker Carslon, who is now the X platform top celebrity journal, who just interviewed Vladimir Putler, the wanted war criminal, last week in Moscow. Putler sold the same old Soviet lies about Ukraine being an inexisting state, about Poland being responsible for the Second World War. Tucker just opened his mouth and went numb for half an hour. When he woke up, the whole world was laughing as tons of memes with Putler telling the world history showed up all over the social media. But the fact is that Carlson learned the hard way that it is indeed not that hard to cock the talk when you go to bed with KGB officer ruling the evil state of Russia.
I have been very, very direct with Secretary Stoltenberg and members of the alliance in saying that NATO members must finally contribute their fair share and meet their financial
those
obligations.
Things happen, former U.S. President Donald Trump's remarks about conditional support for NATO allies have drawn criticism for potentially undermining collective security. Trump suggested that the US might not defend NATO members who do not meet spending obligations, a stance that NATO's chief and President Joe Biden have labeled as dangerous and detrimental to the alliance's foundational principle of collective defense. These comments raise concerns about the potential implications for international security and the cohesion of the NATO alliance. On the other hand, it is nothing new in Europe. When Donald Trump indeed was the President of the United States, he made it clear that his views on NATO collective defense are closely related to US dollars, precisely to at least 2% of the state GDPs or certain states' GDP in US dollars. And that should not be any kind of surprise for anyone. We've been actually discussing it on our program for a very, very long time. NATO member states need to think about their own defense, and you have to buy a ticket for the ride if this ride means common collective defense of the NATO alliance. You can join us on rackracon.com. That's our address and that's our Substack. You can leave us your email. We will send you the reports from the front lines of the war against the West that we are following here on Rackracon, because that's what we are going to talk about on my show. My name is Michał Rachon. This is Rackracon, and we roll in. It's Monday, so Joe Lindsay is again on Telewizja Republika. Great to see you again, Joe. Big news. Last week we talked about the expectations regarding the changes on the top positions of the Ukrainian military. Yesterday we talked about the expected Tucker Carlson's interview. Both of those things happened. Much more happened in terms of what is going on during the war. Russian war in Ukraine, but let's start with those changes in the top military command. You were having some very interesting internal discussions precisely when that happened.
Yeah, indeed, Michał. Hello from Kyiv. And, the past weeks as I've traveled the country, especially in Donbass and Kharkiv regions, I talked to a lot of soldiers, and when there was concern building that President Zelenskyy was going to dismiss General Zelenskyy, and there was a lot of anger about that over the course of several weeks. But when the actual announcement was made, I was at a hidden conference here in Kyiv, 3 or 4 stories underground for safety, so we don't get targeted by the Russians. And it was the Kyiv International Cyber Resilience Forum. Amazing people from around the world and Ukraine, civilian and military, working to develop technology to fight the Russian invaders, but also to help people around the world defend themselves and to grow businesses. And so at this conference were many military members of the Ukrainian military. And right as the conference was ending, was the very moment we got the news that President Zelenskyy had replaced General Zelenskyy with Alexander Syrskyi. And it was just amazing to me how calm everyone was. People sort of saw the news, coming in on our phones, and no one was panicking or running around, or, we just continued our conversations. We knew a change was coming. People have different opinions on it, but everyone was incredibly calm. So that was the first thing I noticed. And, since I've spoken with people since, you get different perspectives on it. The headlines that we saw from whether it's Financial Times or Reuters or comments on X tended to be a bit negative, which is not so surprising perhaps. But for example, the Financial Times, which, was a respectable publication, Christopher Miller has often written about Ukraine, and he chose in his article about the new commander-in-chief of Ukraine's military, Alexander Syrskyi, to focus, even in the headline and in the story, on Syrskyi's so-called costly defense of Bakhmut. And there was a skewed perspective in a lot of this reporting. So yes, Bakhmut was costly. War is difficult and terrible. But what this story failed to mention, and this was a trend I saw on X as well, is that, because of what happened in Bakhmut, Wagner is gone. We don't talk about Wagner anymore. Why? And Wagner was decimated in the Battle of Bakhmut, that very long and terrible battle. Many Ukrainians lost life and limb during that time, but also on the flip side, huge destruction was done to one of the most feared parts of the Russian military. That's not even mentioned in the context of these stories. So that's an important thing to realize. And even as I looked on X, there's these very sneaky accounts, and we see a little bit of this in the media. People who claim to be rah-rah in support of Ukraine, but in the crucial moments where you're required to really have perspective in these sensitive moments, they go on the attack. And so some of these so-called pro-Ukraine accounts were going after Alexander Syrskyi because he was born in Russia, because his parents are in Russia. The fact is, many Ukrainians, because of Moscow deportations and previous close relations, have relatives, have many Ukrainian heroes have parents in Russia with whom they can't speak. They can call them up, but their parents believe the propaganda. So that's a common situation here, and it's sort of a ridiculous way to attack the new commander-in-chief. And as I still talk with people, including in the military, who are angry about it, but I talk with many people who are hopeful. And I think the past days, the best analysis
Joe,
I have.
Let me stop you for a second here. What is the reason for which, first of all, those people you talk to are angry, and maybe that's the most important question, actually. What is the reason for which Zelenskyy decided to make this change?
Well, first we have to remember that, or realize, General Zelenskyy was much more popular than President Zelenskyy. Ukrainians do not worship politicians like we do in the West. We sort of have cults of celebrities. Ukrainians are very skeptical of everyone in power. That's part of their real sort of Maidan protest democracy. But they had great respect for the military, of course, and civil society leaders, and really great respect for Zelenskyy. And including, within the military and within civil society. And, I realized that General Zelenskyy, and probably he was just the right guy for the first, year and a half, 2 years of the Russian full-scale invasion. He's like a grandfather figure. He's like a Santa Claus in a way. I mean, he's a very friendly, jovial fellow. And so he made people feel comfortable. Especially with the distrust people.
Do you think, because when I asked the question, what was the reason, first thing you are mentioning, and that's actually the thing that is very often also available if someone is looking for information about the reasons, is that his personal popularity was a kind of a political threat to Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Is that the reason, or are there military reasons behind this decision?
I suspect it's more military reasons because, in some ways, yeah, many do, and it is very possible many people think he could run for president and win, but he's more free to do that now that he's no longer commander-in-chief. Zelenskyy offered him a very prominent position as ambassador from Ukraine to the Court of St. James, to the United Kingdom, which would put Zelenskyy in a very powerful, prominent position. So if you're trying to take out a political opponent, those are not the steps you would take. And really, as I look
argue
deeper,
here. Placing someone outside of your political sphere, outside of a fighting country, it may very well be a kind of a future excuse. Well, we are fighting a war, and General Zelenskyy was an ambassador in Great Britain while our boys are bleeding out on the front lines. That's the easy way to exploit this kind of decision. So politically, if Zelenskyy wants to think about the future political career, it wasn't a bad move to refuse it.
Perhaps so. It wasn't a bad. Although I do think it would be important to have more Ukrainians who speak English well, with great experience, speaking. Not just President Zelenskyy, but many other voices speaking powerfully in the West. But as you look, like the General Syrskyi is not beloved. He's not a grandfatherly fellow. He doesn't wear a baby what is it called? Baby Yoda patch.
Yeah.
And as one keen observer, Ruslan Kukarchuk, a leader of sort of Ukrainian sort of conservative civil society, said, General Syrskyi is sort of the opposite of Zelenskyy. He's lean. He doesn't smile. He doesn't joke. He's a very deadly serious guy. one of the criticisms of him is that, and you saw this in a lot of the media accounts, that he's a butcher, that he doesn't care about losing lives. But that's just, like, we look at Bakhmut, Zelenskyy was in charge of all that, by the way, but the guy, closer on the ground was Syrskyi, and made calculated decisions to try to end this in a quicker manner. And so I think part of the debate that's going on behind the scenes is like, yeah, you might, and this is horrible to realize, you might have to, have more difficult and painful battles more quickly to put an end to this. But certainly there is a very different personality difference between someone like General Syrskyi and General Zelenskyy. Like Zelenskyy is, again, a jovial guy, but I mean, he would give out medals to civilian volunteers from other countries who, I was sort of shocked by that. I was shocked that he was spending time doing things like that, especially when I know those volunteers. Like I don't see General Syrskyi doing that. He's totally focused on the nuts and bolts of battle and victory. And so I understand why people are upset. I mean, it's, especially when people who don't love their political leaders, Zelenskyy was that guy. But in this change, there does seem to be an effort to move things more quickly on the front. And there was a professor, I think I mentioned him a few weeks ago, at Ukrainian Catholic University, Yaroslav Hertsik. He's a historian. And he said, these first 2 years, Ukrainians love freedom. We're Europeans. We had the revolution so we could have peace and freedom. But he says, right now, in this dire time, we have to dig deep into our ancient warlike roots as Scythians. He says it's time to be Scythians. We have to transform our whole society.
Yeah, you mentioned it. We talked about it 2 weeks ago. Actually, in 2 weeks' time, we are going to have a second anniversary of the full-scale invasion. But this also marks, and it's probably in little less than 2 weeks, we got a milestone of 10 years, 10 long years after Russia illegally annexed Crimea, which basically marks the beginning of this 10 years long war. As these things happen, Tucker Carlson, we used to talk about Tucker Carlson at least a couple of times, visited Moscow. As we expected, and actually as the whole world expected, he interviewed Vladimir Putin. It was a sad show in a way, at least for someone with the conservative view and with the respect to the things that Tucker Carlson was doing as an anchorman of Fox News years ago. Well, he was just used by Vladimir Putin to distribute the blatant lies about the history of this region, about Russia being actually the victim of NATO now, years ago when the Soviet Union collapsed, and actually my home state, my motherland, Poland, being to blame for the Second World War, which is a total lie, but actually is a talking point of Vladimir Putin for very, very long time. What do you make of the interview that we saw?
Well, I think we can't call it an interview. It was a lecture. Putin was lecturing Tucker and Tucker's audience. And when I speak with Americans who tend to, appreciate Tucker Carlson, a lot of them were bored. They couldn't get past the first few minutes, so that's good. But Putin did. I mean, he sort of very shrewdly, he set out, as he always does, to erase the idea of Ukraine and to co-opt Ukraine's incredible, inspiring history and make it his own, kind of like Sméagol in Lord of the Rings, my precious. He was so obsessed with Kyiv, and he gave his sort of blenderized version of the history of the Kievan Rus. And it's I think the thing that I noticed the most, he talked so much about Kyiv, and he didn't talk about Moscow. He didn't define what Russia is. What is Russia besides this history that, that is actually Ukrainian? And, in Poland and the United States and Ukraine, we can talk about what our national identity is. We mentioned words like freedom and democracy and culture. That was really not, Putin doesn't define what Russia and Moscow is. And I realized this the other day going for a run around Kyiv. I had seen a video from Tucker Carlson during his trip to Moscow, and he was praising the beautiful buildings and all that. And I realized how sad it is that he's ignored the story of Ukraine and, say, Kyiv. And I'm going around Kyiv on Saturday morning, and I'm thinking, when we think of Moscow, our images of the Kremlin. When we think of Russia, that vast country, we think of one building, and it's the government. It's a source of power, and that's the identity. And then I think of Kyiv. I don't even know the government. I hardly know the government buildings here. They're not the central public sacred spaces. The public sacred spaces in Kyiv are the Maidan, the public square where the revolutions happened, most recently in 2014, and that is more sacred than the parliament building because that's where the people can take control of their democracy. And even when they're not there, like right now, there's always a threat. Every politician knows at any moment the people could go to the Maidan and reclaim their society. So the Maidan is the sacred heart of Kyiv. And then on the ridge above Kyiv are two churches. There's St. Sophia, the green domed Cathedral of St. Sophia, which is older than the city of Moscow itself, the home of Slavic Christianity. And then down that boulevard within sight is the Golden Dome Church of St. Michael the Archangel. And as you go around Kyiv, you see signs everywhere saying St. Michael is the patron and the symbol of Kyiv. And so Kyiv is about the most sacred places in Kyiv are about genuine democracy and about religion and tradition. And so what Putin doesn't have that in Russia. And so he tries to obscure it because the amazing thing is that Tucker Carlson and his audience, if they knew the real story of Kyiv, they would absolutely love it. They'd probably come here and try to help.
But it actually tells us a lot about, sorry to say that, about Tucker himself. I mean, it's not very hard to, when you're preparing this kind of huge interview, when you make up your mind and you decide that you are going to talk to someone who is accused of being and actually is a war criminal wanted by the international courts, you should be prepared. And you should know his talking points, and those talking points are nothing new. I mean, the version of history in which Russia is the savior and the motherland of the values is something that Vladimir Putin is trying to distribute and sell to the world for the last 20 years. You should be ready. You should be prepared to challenge those claims. They weren't challenged at all. But what puzzles me is when I read the English-speaking infosphere, when I read comments on X in the media that are referring to Tucker Carlson's interviewing Putin, when I read the conservative comments, there are lots of them that actually share Putin's views and share Putin's basically lies about the situation in Central Europe, in Ukraine, basically in the states that are part of our common Western civilization, attacked by Russia right now.
Yeah, I think Putin knew, he wanted to reach those people. And, this is one reason, Michal, why, one of the major reasons why I left my prime position at Fox News, where I was protege to the chairman. I was sort of prince of that empire. Because for all the resources they have, and Tucker's no longer there, but he's incredibly rich. He's got all the resources in the world. They spend no money on fact-checking, on preparing for an interview. I mean, this is a pretty big interview. Be prepared with the information, and he wasn't whatsoever. And so we have to ask ourselves, who are we letting? Who is shaping this narrative for us? It's people that are too lazy in many ways to go deep into the truth, and they just want to feel some good emotion. And the Russians know this, and the Russians also know, the Kremlin knows that, many Americans who appreciate Tucker Carlson are rightly fed up with 20 years of failed American wars, Iraq and Afghanistan, and they don't like the Biden administration. And so, Putin sort of convinces them that he's on their side. In fact, I think the big coup that Putin did with this interview is that he made Tucker subservient to him. So Tucker was someone that people talked about could run for president, but now Putin made himself the king of Tucker's diehard fans and removed Tucker from the equation. But if the fact is, like, the Biden White House is not totally in support of victory. It's almost 2 years, and they seem scared. They still refuse to send long-range weapons and the permission to use them against Russia. So they're not actually in favor of Ukraine. Ukraine is actually the one of the strongest bastions of faith, family, and freedom.
Yeah,
Russia is doing everything they can to erase it.
That's what Joe is witnessing for those years already he spent in Ukraine. My final question, and this is also a question of the things that happened during that last week, the week we haven't seen each other. Donald Trump's words. Those words sent shockwaves through the media mainstream. I wonder why, because it's nothing new if someone remembers the U.S. policies when Donald Trump was president of the United States. You can like Donald Trump or dislike him, you can hate him. I know people hate him and people love him. That doesn't matter. The thing is that NATO, actually 2% rule was one of the most important rules that was highlighted by him while he was the president of the United States. He is off the office for 4 years right now, and still this is the case. I mean, we do have problems with NATO member states spending at least 2% GDP on their military, as if we haven't learned anything for those 2 years of full-scale war of Russia against Ukraine.
Well, and Mia, that's exactly, I think, that explains sort of the demeanor of Trump's comments there. He was quoting what he said to NATO, I think, in 2019. So what the headline said that Trump says Russia should invade Europe. No, of course not. That's not what he was saying. He was quoting himself in 2019 when he was basically begging NATO to say, pay that 2% that you promised, because war is going to happen if you're not strong and not prepared. And so back then in 2019, he said, if NATO doesn't do it, fine, I would encourage Russia to invade. He said that before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. But, you know, when I heard that comment, you know, there's many Ukrainians I know in moments of frustration as they're losing blood, life, and limb to stand for freedom for themselves and for Europe and the world. I've heard many Ukrainians say that too when there's, you know, when Scholz in Germany refuses to provide long-range weapons, for example, Ukrainians will say, fine, I hope Russia invades you and you'll see what it's like. You know, like,
and then you're going to know
serious,
how,
because Russia's made it clear that they don't want to be stopped. And, you know, Joe Biden said he was able to put together some statement, I guess, and he said that Trump's remarks were appalling and dangerous. Okay, even if that's true, I think it's also appalling and dangerous to wave the Ukrainian colors, to say you support Ukraine, and make people think you are spending tons of money here when most of that money is staying in the U.S., and when you refuse, as the White House has done for 2 years, to send long-range weapons and permission to use them to Ukraine. That's actually appalling and dangerous, because you're undermining support for Ukraine, making people bored with it, which is exactly what the Kremlin wants.
As if you were scared that this war could be lost by Russia, and if you were scared of the consequences of this fact. Well, Ronald Reagan wasn't scared of building a policy with the easy solution. We win, they lose. It was such an easy thing, and they lost. Joe, thanks a lot. We see each other next week. I don't know if we are going to have another packed week with such big news to comment next week. We surely will, because there are, as I said, 2 weeks before the second anniversary of the Russian attack, full-scale attack against Ukraine, and 10th anniversary of this war, if we count the illegal annexation of Crimea. Joe Lindsay, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, until next week. Thank you.
You can, of course, find Joe Lindsay's charity organization and fundraising organizations that support Ukrainians in their fight against Russian invasion. You can also join us on Substack. That's our address, racon.com. You'll find us there. You can leave us your email, and we will try to send you the reports about what's going on in this war against the Western civilization that we all witness. Stay safe. See you tomorrow. Ciao, ciao. Bye.